Earlier this week, the National Bureau of Statistics released the inflation data for September 2024. Beyond the numbers, what is the outlook for the rest of the year and what are the implications, especially for the common man? Tonight, Babajide Okusonwo, founder of Leadership by Data and Channels Television's data analyst, is here to share more insight about the September inflation report. Babajide, great to have you again.
Good evening, today.
All right, so are there signs that from what we're talking about here, inflation report, are there signs of light at the end of the tunnel, really?
Perhaps there's some good.
The trends, what do the trends show?
Yeah, the trends show good and bad news. With reference to light at the end of the tunnel, yes, there's some good news. There is light at the end of the tunnel. The bad news, however, Yatunde, is that based on these trends, majority may not make it to the end of the tunnel. That is the bad news. You know, the inflation report for several years has made people focus on just one thing, which is the rising price of goods. However, the inflation report, same inflation report, is a good barometer to measure currency risks. Currency risks is a good barometer to measure consumer and household risks. Consumer and household risks is a good barometer to measure business risks. Business risks is a good barometer to measure investments and financial risks. And investment and financial risks is a good barometer to measure economic risks. So in simple terms, what I'm saying is whenever we have an inflation report, beyond it giving us the measure of how prices of goods and services are rising, it gives us a lot of insights. And this is because, yes, this inflation report talks about 32.7%. The question we're asking is, what sort of inflation reports are we finding in other European countries and in the US? So let's take a look at the fact of the week as a good basis to look at where exactly are other countries. So the question today is there any country in the European Union that inflation rate is above 5% per annum? Don't forget, we have 27 countries in the European Union. The evidence shows that there is no country, none of these 27 countries in the European Union has an inflation rate of above 5% per annum. In Nigeria, Ayotunde, based on this report, the inflation rate is 32.7%. Makes it hard for investments to come in, makes it hard for the economy to really grow, makes it hard for Nigerians to survive.
So, Babajide, is this inflation rate significantly different from others? I mean, the report, that is.
So here's what I've done. Prior to this September inflation report, we've had 25 other September inflation reports. So this made it inflation rate number 26 for September. And what I've done is put all these inflation reports side by side to find out which is the best, which is the worst. And the evidence, Ayotunde, sadly shows that this September inflation report is the worst report we've had since our return to democracy since 1999. So let's take a look at these facts, because these facts are from the National Bureau of Statistics, looking at all the previous 26 inflation reports in our chart of the week. Here's what you find if you look at it and you spread it out decade on decade from 1999. The first decade between 1999 to 2008, looking at all the September inflation reports, 2005 was the worst report then, 24.3%. The next decade, 2009 to 2018, looking at all the September inflation reports, 2016 was the worst rate, 17.9%. But what has happened ever since 2018, looking at the subsequent inflation reports year on year from 2019, we are now at 2024, inflation report for September, 32.7%. Again, I repeat, no inflation report in those previous 25 inflation reports for September has been as high as 32.7%. And this is why Nigerians are really angry, because they've never seen a September this bad.
So, Babajide, there are concerns really over the productivity of Nigeria's farmlands, especially protecting small and, of course, a medium scale of farmers. Is there any data to track, how much security agencies have achieved in that regard?
So we're working on, we're expecting some new information for October to allow us to collate it. But prior to now, what we've done is to look at what has happened across the regions. And, when I do this analysis, there are three ways I like to look at it. The first is when we look at Nigeria, first of all, look at Nigeria as an entity. The second is to look at Nigeria from the regional perspective, the northern region and the southern region, because it allows us to know what is going on in each of the geopolitical blocks. But the third and perhaps the most important way I like to look at it is to isolate the northwest and the northeast. And I'll tell you why I do this. The northwest and the northeast holds more than half of Nigerians who are categorized as poor. You heard me right. Just the northwest and the northeast. More than half of Nigerians who are categorized as poor live in these two regions. Plus, the northwest and the northeast, when we talk about Nigeria's old 909 square thousand kilometer, the northwest and the northeast accounts for more than half of Nigeria's land area. So in reality, beyond looking at Nigeria from the northern and southern perspective, it is to understand that Nigeria's success really is hinged on what happens in the northwest and the northeast. So let's take a look at what does this report say about food inflation across Nigeria's 6 regions. And again, the evidence from this September inflation report looks at what happened in this September compared to last year's September. The report shows that the northwest and northeast has the highest food inflation. Again, don't forget, the northwest and the northeast represents where you have the most vulnerable Nigerians. The poorest of the poor live in these regions, and this report is telling us that in these 2 regions, food inflation relative to any other region is the highest. So in simple terms, the poor are getting poorer. Ayotunde, that is the challenge we face today. Yes, we talked about good news. There's some light at the end of the tunnel, but what the government needs to really understand is while it's working on solutions, several Nigerians are worried that they might not make it to the end of this tunnel.
Well, definitely we'll continue to keep tabs on the situation, but well, like you said, there seems to be light at the end of the tunnel.
Surely, it's good and it's bad news.
And it's good and it's bad news. Thank you so much again, Babajide Obiso, for your analysis.
The pleasure is all mine.